In one voice, the world declared, human rights are women's rights, and women's rights are human rights.
It's our responsibility to make this world a better place. Yes, we play sports. Yes, we play soccer. Yes, we're female athletes, but we're so much more than that.
The women's movement of this world has mellowed. Our issues and our conversation has become issues for men. No woman should sit down and allow a man to speak about her reproductive rights.
Good evening, and welcome to an in-depth look at the importance of Women's History Month and what work still needs to be made. I'm Julia Wachtel, and on tonight's show, we will talk about what feminism means, women's history thus far, and looking to the future of gender equity. Starting off tonight's show, I wanted to learn more about what it means to be a feminist, intersectionality in feminism, and the need to continue feminist education and activism. This past week, I had the opportunity to speak with Miss Foundation's president and CEO, Teresa C. Younger. She spoke to me about feminism and the work the organization is doing. First of all, I just wanted to say thank you for doing this. I really appreciate it. I can't wait to talk a little bit more with you. Before we begin, can you introduce us to your listeners, tell us a little bit about yourself and the organization you are a part of?
I'm Teresa Younger. I'm the president and CEO of the Ms. Foundation for Women. The Ms. Foundation is the national public women's foundation in this country. It has been at the forefront of leading conversations around feminism and inclusion, the role of philanthropy, and where women have found a voice and an opportunity to build collective power. And so the work of the foundation is really primarily to build the collective power in the United States for equity and justice for all. And we do that by investing in and strengthening the capacity of women-led movements that advance social, economic, cultural change in the lives of women and the lives of all those who define as they define. And that's really important to recognize that the work that we're doing at the Ms. Foundation is for gender equity, not buying into a gender binary, but for gender equity for all throughout the country, and then our role as we are trying to do in the world.
What does Ms. Foundation hope to accomplish?
Our vision is of a safe and just world where power and possibility are not limited. And part of the reason I say that out loud is because we actually know that we are striving for a space where all people can be who they want to be. And we are striving for a space where we recognize that if every person does just one thing, we can make a change in this world that builds for a greater democracy.
What does having revolutionary figures like Gloria Steinem create this organization mean to Ms. Foundation now?
Yeah. How amazing is that, right? I'm working at the foundation that was started by Gloria Steinem, by Marlo Thomas, right? These are icons in the space of building collective power, holding women's voices, creating greater levels of consciousness. These are women who have had my back all the way through the transition into the Ms. Foundation. They helped pave the way for us to have the conversations and do the work that we're doing today. And we're in a very different state of mind, right? When they started the Ms. Foundation almost 50 years ago, women didn't have access to capital in their own name. They were barely getting access to college and higher education. It was such a different time. And what they attempted to do with the Ms. Foundation then was to build a collective consciousness, right? And to come together and say, you're not in this alone. Today, the Ms. Foundation is a little bit different. We center the work of women and girls of color, and we trust that women have the answers to help and heal their communities. And we have that model in somebody like a Gloria Steinem. It's really kind of exciting and wonderful because she understands also the value of trust and the value of listening. And so when I started at the Ms. Foundation, I did a listening tour at the same time as she was releasing her latest book, My Life on the Road. And so here we had two circumstances of how you transfer your way through life, how you listen, the value of what you hear and how it has an impact. And so I am forever grateful. I used to say, I grew up in North Dakota. And so I always said, I grew up knowing more about farming than feminism. And I thought that GS meant Girl Scouts, not Gloria Steinem. And I was a longtime Girl Scout and still am to this day. And Gloria Steinem can call me on my cell phone. And when she does, I still have a little bit of a girl crush going on. I fangirl still when she calls to this day.
Woman's Session. What is it and why is it important?
So I think, a key part of the work of the Ms. Foundation is about recognizing the role and the impact that women, gender nonconforming, trans folks all have in our society, and recognizing that when we recognizing the power that women actually do have and the impact that they have when we take a step back to look at what's happening in the world today. So when we talk about a women's session, it's like, what does it look like to have the power of women in the workplace, in the home, on the front lines, doing the work that we do? And, the scariest part of this pandemic has been its disproportionate impact on women, as well as women and girls of color in this country. And just, how often we always just assume that women will be where they are. And what happens when, we have something like the pandemic going on and women are not able to juggle, and the society has expected women to hold all of these roles in our society, and just and what that looks like. So having real conversation about that.
What is the #MyFeminismIs campaign?
Oh, I love it. Thank you for asking me that question, Julia. The My Feminism Is campaign, when I started at the Ms. Foundation, so I've been with the foundation almost 7 years now. And when I started, I kept saying, I'm a feminist. And everybody kept saying, like, well, what does that mean? What are you? Are you a Black feminist? Are you, a second or third wave feminist? Are you a fourth wave feminist? What are you? And so what I wanted to do was ensure that everybody could define themselves in the term feminism. So we started a campaign that said feminism is the social, political, and economic equality of all genders. And the idea of that was to say that feminism should be all of those things, social, political, and economic, and that anybody and everybody can be a feminist. And so the My Feminism Is campaign was just our attempt to start hosting those conversations with folks of all different backgrounds, all different ethnicities and races and ages, abilities and disabilities, so that we could really kind of lean into a conversation about what does it look like to have a collective power around feminism. And so we started the campaign, My Feminism Is, and colleges and universities all over the country took it on and made it their campaign. And they started asking the question, are you a feminist? How do you define it? And then how do you define it for you? And there's no right or wrong answer to it, but it is a point of absolute inclusion and acceptance and a movement towards greater democracy. And so the My Feminism Is campaign, still online, and folks can see it, is really about having open and honest conversations about the movement towards equity and equality in this country.
I'm going to shift gears a little bit. I want to know, in your opinion, how can we better include trans women in the fight for gender equality?
Yeah. Well, we need to get it, one, away from a gender binary. And two, we need to ask ourselves the question, who's at this table? And if we really want somebody to be at the table with us, we actually have to decide why we're inviting them in and how we are going to be supportive of them. And so when I think of trans women and the communities that we have supported, for us, trans women are women, and we make no distinction between that. For us, we recognize that there may be some decisions that society has made that do make it harder for them. And how are we building towards that? How are we trying to break down the stereotypes, the assumptions around gender binaries, and allow folks to be who they are? And so we really, I always think this idea of inclusion also places a centering in the wrong spot. So, it says, I'm the center and I'm going to include you, as opposed to maybe you are the center and how do I get brought into your space? And we need to ask ourselves that question a lot. We need to ask ourselves, who's setting the table and whose space are we in? So at the Ms. Foundation, we do center women and girls of color as a center part of a conversation, because we know that those most marginalized actually, when we fix when we fix the world for them, we fix the world for everybody. And the same with our trans siblings. When we fix the world for them, we fix the world for everybody. And as soon as we move away from these pre-assigned determinations of what men and women are supposed to do and look like, and allow for people to fully define themselves as they see and want to be themselves, that's just a much better, more inclusive space for us all.
In your opinion, what are some of the first things that need to improve to become closer to reaching equality?
So I think we have to have real open and honest conversations about the world we're in, right? And I know people are like, well, how do we have those? Can we just acknowledge the patriarchy? Can we just acknowledge white supremacy? Can we acknowledge masculinity, positives and negatives? So what's toxic masculinity? Can we assume that everybody is functioning in the best interest with the best intentions, and even the best intentions can be harmful to people?
Where can our listeners learn more about Ms. Foundation, and how can they become involved?
Sure, thank you. So you can find the Ms. Foundation on all the handles at Ms. Foundation, and that's MS Foundation. And the reason I say that is because sometimes I think people forget that prior to 1970s, there was no determination the way Mr. was a determination. Every man was a Mr. Ms. was not a determination. So you were either married or not married, but Ms. is actually a determination that denotes neither of those, and you can define that way. So it's Ms. Foundation, MS Foundation. You can also find us at forwomen.org, FORWOMEN.org, and go to our website. And up there, you can sign up for our newsletters, and you can learn much more about the work that we're doing and about the amazing women and women of color-led organizations throughout the United States that are doing amazing work in their communities to make change happen. And you can also make contributions and donations there to help support those efforts. I think the one thing that I would just add is that this is an opportunity and a time for learning, and we have to assume that people are operating from good intentions. Doesn't always mean that they are, but we have to start there. And let's have the conversations with our friends and with our families. That really helps integrate a conversation that's fuller today than the world we know it as it is today. So everybody just has to do one thing, ask one question at one meal, and educate yourself. Don't expect everybody else to educate you.
Thanks again to Ms. Foundation's president and CEO, Teresa C. Younger. For WRHU, I'm Julia Wachtel. Our thanks to the National Organization for Women, Ms. Foundation, for their insight. March 1987 was declared the first official Women's History Month, and feminism has come a long way since then. Feminism has become more inclusive towards people of color and queer people. It has also become a lot easier to celebrate the month by supporting women-owned business, amplify women musicians, authors, and artists. You can also donate to women's charities and safe houses. WRHU reporter Natalie Khait has more on the history of International Women's Day and its importance.
International Women's Day, which is marked annually on March 8th, is a global day celebrating the social, economic, cultural, and political achievements of women. This day also raises awareness about women's equality and lobbies for accelerated gender parity. International Women's Day wasn't always celebrated on March 8th. It was first celebrated in 1911 in Austria, Denmark, Germany, and Switzerland on March 19th. More than 1 million women and men attended International Women's Day rallies, campaigning for women's rights to work, vote, and be trained. However, less than a week later, on March 25th, the tragic Triangle Fire in New York City took the lives of over 140 working women. This event drew more attention to females and marked their achievements for the first time in history. In 1917, on the last Sunday of February, Russian women began to strike for bread and peace in response to World War I. The strike lasted for 4 days when the government finally granted females the right to vote. The date the women's strike commenced was Sunday, February 23rd, on the Julian calendar that Russia used to use. This day on the Gregorian calendar, which was used everywhere else in the world, was March 8th. Every day, but especially on March 8th, celebrate the achievements of all women in the world and what they have done for us, and ensure that the future for females is bright, equal, safe, and rewarding. Reporting for WRHU, I'm Natalie Khait.
Thank you, Natalie Khait, for that report. These days, feminism takes on many forms, whether it be claiming the power and control to choose or speaking out against women who have been mistreated in everyday life. But how did we get to this point, and how did it all begin? With more on that, we have Cait O'Brien.
The United States celebrated the 100th anniversary of women getting the right to vote in 2020. This milestone came in 1920 after nearly a century of a movement in support of suffrage that all started in Seneca Falls, New York. Suffragettes Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott organized the Seneca Falls Convention in 1848, with both men and women attending the first conference. The movement lost some momentum when the Civil War began. At the war's end, the women's rights movement was divided over voting rights for black men. Stanton and Susan B. Anthony formed the National Women's Suffrage Association with hopes of passing a federal constitutional amendment that would grant women the right to vote. Abolitionist allies like Frederick Douglass and Sojourner Truth broke away from the association as both black men and women faced discrimination from white suffragists. Black suffragists founded their own movement and fought for a 19th Amendment for all women, hoping this would provide legal protections for black women and men. As the movement continued, 17 states then granted women the right to vote by 1918. Through continued protest and support from some politicians, an amendment to let all women vote passed in the House of Representatives in May of 1919. 2 months later, the Susan Anthony Amendment passed through the Senate and was sent to the states to be ratified. After much struggles with the states, the amendment finally passed on August 26, 1920. Nearly 8 million women would go on to vote on Election Day of that year. The amendment reads, "The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. Congress shall have power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation." It is important to note that women of color did not have equal access to the voting booth until later in the 20th century. Black women continued to be discriminated against at the polls. Native American women were not made citizens until 1924, and Chinese American immigrant women would have to wait until the 1940s to be made citizens who could vote. Reporting for WRHU about the fight for women's suffrage, I'm Cait O'Brien.
Thank you, Cait O'Brien, for that report. Beyond legislature and politics, women have made enormous strides in their media industries, using their unique experiences to form discussion and facilitate conversation on gender norms and culture. With more on that, we have Courtney Adema.
This past weekend, the Golden Globes honored numerous women and celebrated a number of firsts. Chloe Zhao won Best Director and is the first Asian woman and only the second woman ever to do so.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Hollywood Foreign Press, and thank you, my fellow nominees. Thank you for making beautiful, beautiful movies. This award belongs to the whole Nomadland team. The entire cast and crew, all the producers, everyone at Searchlight, you all know who you are. Thank you so much.
Within recent years, women have been making strides towards better representation both in front of and behind the camera. In the past year, women accounted for 16% of directors from top films, up from 12% in 2019 and 4% in 2018. TV streaming programs have also seen a spike, with 32% of shows directed by women in the last season, in comparison to 15% from 2018 to 2019. Beyond this, women have employed 31% of behind-the-scene roles overall in the last year. The increase in women creators has translated into more female representation on the screen. More than 42% of TV shows and movies produced within the last year featured a clearly identifiable female protagonist. Despite these improvements, women are still more likely to be depicted in a serving role. Geena Davis, star of Thelma and Louise, noticed this trend and decided to conduct her own research.
When my daughter Alize was maybe 2, I decided, hey, maybe I can start showing her G-rated videos and little kids' TV shows. And the very first thing I put on was a kids' TV show. And I immediately noticed that there seemed to be far more male characters than female characters. Of the characters who have jobs in family-rated films, 80% of the jobs are held by male characters. And you'll find almost no female characters in any kind of leadership position.
Adam Driver, Taron Egerton, and Michael B. Jordan, 3 of the 2019 Oscar nominees for Best Actor, had never worked with a female director, and a 4th, Joaquin Phoenix, has only worked with 1 in his 34-movie career. As a part of the Time's Up campaign, in 2017, Nicole Kidman, Jennifer Lopez, and Tessa Thompson, amongst others, made pledges to work with female directors. Within recent years, the industry has seen impressive works by women, such as Booksmart, directed by Olivia Wilde, The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, created by Amy Sherman Palladino, and Little Women, directed by Greta Gershwin.
I just feel like women, they have minds and they have souls as well as just hearts, and they've got ambition and they've got talent as well as just beauty. And I'm so sick of people saying that love is just all a woman is fit for. I'm so sick of it.
This past weekend at the Golden Globes, Jane Fonda was recognized for her work in the industry with the Cecil B. DeMille Award and brought attention to the need for more diversity.
There's a story we've been afraid to see and hear about ourselves in this industry. A story about which voices we respect and elevate and which we tune out. A story about who's offered a seat at the table and who is kept out of the rooms where decisions are made. So let's all of us, including all the groups that decide who gets hired and what gets made and who wins awards, let's all of us make an effort to expand that tent so that everyone rises and everyone's story has a chance to be seen and heard.
I'm Courtney Adema for WRHU.
Thank you, Courtney, for that report. Women have used social media platforms to showcase diverse female voices and perspectives. In a professional setting, women continue to fight for their voices to be heard. Those who have made a name for themselves in industries like journalism have become an inspiration to many others. With more on the women in journalism, here's Katerina Belales.
Good morning, America. We have a lot of breaking news to get to this morning.
This is the CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell, reporting from the nation's capital.
This is ABC World News with Diane Sawyer.
From NBC News, this is Today with Savannah Guthrie and Hoda Kotb.
Women are taking over the field of journalism, one major news outlet at a time. While studies do show female reporters have remained at around only 37% of total journalists, it is undeniable that women have been paving the way for the future of female journalism. In fact, many hold some of the top leadership positions in news. One of the most historic days in broadcast television was January 2nd, 2018, the day Savannah Guthrie and Hoda Kotb became the first female anchor duo of NBC's The Today Show.
Hoda is officially the co-anchor of Today. Let's give her a round of applause. This has to be the most popular decision NBC News has ever made, and I am so thrilled.
One woman, however, who Guthrie and many others say acted as the ultimate trailblazer for the female journalist community, was none other than Barbara Walters.
Barbara is a legend, she's an icon, and I think as a woman working in this business, all of us know we stand on her shoulders. I mean, she is the true definition of a pioneer and a groundbreaker, and I really admire her.
Walters says she's proud to have been a trailblazer for other female journalists in the broadcast television industry.
How proud when I see all the young women who are making and reporting the news. If I did anything to help that happen, that's my legacy.
While many of these women are of celebrity status, many local female reporters have also made an impact within their community. Elizabeth Burke, a longtime anchor and now freelance reporter at News 12 Long Island, believes social media has given anchors, both local and national, a platform for spreading awareness about representation and diversity.
We are seeing news professionals in more of a casual setting on social media, and we're getting a real look into their lives. There used to be a wall in between, and that wall has been taken down, and now we see news journalists as real people. By seeing a diverse group on television, it makes it more realistic. They're showing you that they're successful, and if you try hard and you really want something, it's something that is achievable because you're seeing these great examples on camera every day, and it gives us the drive to work hard to try and get there.
As for Burke herself, she knew she always wanted to be a journalist ever since she was a little girl.
I watched the news frequently, and I was always intrigued by the news anchors. Sue Simmons was one on NBC TV. I would watch her every night. My father also worked for Newsweek magazine as an editorial assistant, so I was exposed to news and the news cycle and the magazine and just the field itself. So it was something that I really had an interest in at a very young age. I would play with friends on my block and act like a news reporter. So it was definitely something inside of me as a storyteller.
Her journey at News 12 wasn't always easy, but she was determined to rise to the top.
I always showed up on time or 10 minutes early for my shift, and I was always eager to do things and ask questions and volunteer my time. Whatever position I held, I was trying to strive for the next position. So I would ask questions. I would ask colleagues if they could look at my work, if they could look at my reel, how can I enhance my writing? And then there was an opportunity to work on the assignment desk. And working at the assignment desk was incredible because that is the central hub of any newsroom. And that's where you really learn what news is, what stands out, and what types of interviews you need for stories, setting up reporters in the field. And then I became a writer, I did some producing, and eventually they gave me the opportunity to go on camera.
These women not only inspired girls who wanted to pursue journalism in the broadcast industry, but also the ones in print. Drashti Mehta is a senior journalism major right here at Hofstra University, and she is the co-editor-in-chief of the school's newspaper, the Hofstra Chronicle. Like many other women in the field, her passion for writing also started when she was a young girl.
Reading the paper with my parents was always a big part of who I was growing up. My parents were big New York Times subscribers, and so I would say Maggie Haberman was probably my go-to. She was the person I would always read, and that was my motivation to lean toward political journalism in the first place. I always admired reading her articles in the New York Times.
While many female journalists were influenced to enter the field through the idea of telling stories, Drashti's passion for journalism grew because of something more personal, her own family.
My family and the surrounding South Asian community as a person of color didn't fully understand what journalism was, or at least the idea that I had of journalism. It was very much associated with paparazzi and these people that will pester celebrities to see what's going on. And so for me, part of it was not wanting to let go of the writing that I love to do, but part of it was also sort of breaking down this stigma around what journalism is and this negative connotation that was associated with it within the South Asian community.
No matter what field of journalism women decide to enter, Norah O'Donnell, head anchor of CBS Evening News, says the goal should always be the same.
The role of a journalist is to report about what our government is doing. We have to make sure that we're right, that we're fair, and bring Americans a greater understanding, but also hopefully bring Americans closer together.
Sound courtesy to NBC's The Today Show, ABC's Good Morning America, ABC's World News Tonight, Barwell ABC, and CBS's Evening News with Norah O'Donnell. For WRHU, I'm Katerina Belales.
Thank you, Katerina, for that report. As Women's History Month continues, keep in mind that there is still much to do in the fight for gender equality. Women of color and transgender women face the most discrimination in the workplace and in everyday life. keeping everyone safe and protected as women push for equal pay and anti-discrimination legislator is the biggest objective. You can do small things every day to work towards this cause, such as dissecting your own biases and standing up for others if you see discrimination, not only this month, but every month. To conclude our broadcast this evening, here's Courtney Ingalls.
It has been almost 140 years since women first started advocating for their own rights in the United States, and women are still being seen fighting for equality in the present day. Education professor at Hofstra University, Andrea Labresco, speaks about what kind of issues women are still fighting for after all these years.
They're certainly still advocating for health. There's plenty of women in America and around the world who don't have access to not just the obvious, like reproductive health care, and that doesn't just include abortion. I mean, that's reproductive health care. That's, birth control. That's prenatal vitamins, all sorts of things like that. There's also this could be a healthcare issue as well, but it's often in a separate category. Harassment and assault. Women are still facing that kind of threat, again, in America and around the world. And associated with that would be also trafficking of women. Women are also facing labor issues, but all of those that involve care, the jobs that involve care get paid less than the jobs that don't involve care.
Things have gotten even more complicated for women since the start of COVID-19. Labresco says women have been experiencing more economic struggles than men.
COVID has really slammed women especially. Of course, there are more women in service industries who have lost their jobs, but then there are more women in service industries who are at risk by being in those jobs. But it's also the case that women, even in white-collar jobs, where women usually are better able to advance and make more money, those women, many of them, have had to quit their jobs or have felt they've had to quit their jobs because somebody's got to care for those kids. Even if you say, oh, well, after COVID's over, those women are going to get hired back. Well, maybe not, but they'll never make the same amount of money again.
Educating younger generations about the history of the women's movement is a step in the right direction for women's advocacy. Labresco believes there are a few reasons as to why public schools are not educating their students enough on this topic.
I think what happens is people just kind of blow by recent history. They're rushing at the end, and they don't give anything the depth it deserves, not purposefully, but just because they're out of time. But it's also the case that whoever's teaching has to know something about it. And if they didn't learn it, and they didn't, if there's not a course required in it, they might not have taken it. So they may feel kind of ill-informed themselves on issues of race, on issues of gender, and so they may not be teaching it for that reason. Again, not out of any malice, but out of ignorance.
One positive that has been developed over the years is the amount of inclusivity within women's advocacy.
I think part of the MO of this sort of fourth wave of feminism that people talk about is that it is much more inclusive, that it ought not to be, that professional women are doing well on the backs of domestic women who support them. I don't think everyone is yet on board with that understanding, but I think more people are. So even before Black Lives Matter got more of its attention in the wake of the George Floyd murder, I think before then, the traditionally sort of powerful white women had been looking to their sisters of color who were not making the same amount of money and not having the same opportunities. And with respect to the Me Too movement, did not have the same luxury of going public necessarily either.
Labresco says she has seen the recent election of Vice President Kamala Harris give many women hope for the future.
It was surprising how huge it felt when finally the votes were counted and they won. Even with this awful kind of election season, that was the moment actually. And it wasn't about Biden, it was about her. And he understood that. So yeah, that's a huge moment for not just every girl of color in the country, but every boy, everybody, period, to see a woman in that position.
In order to see more change continue, Labresco believes women have to start focusing on state government.
One of the ways women have to pay more attention is not just on a national level, but on state by state level. The women who think, oh my goodness, if another Supreme Court justice gets on, we'll have our rights taken away. Well, like Mississippi, Alabama, North Dakota, Kansas, they may have one person who provides abortion in the whole state right now. Texas, it's not as though they're waiting for their rights to get taken away. They're gone.
Overall, Labresco is asking for women to be more understanding and work together with those who might not know as much regarding women's rights.
It's a lot easier to demonize one's enemies or demonize one's non-allies, because they're not all enemies, than it is to spend the lots of time one has to put in to work with them. We need to give people some of the time to think about the issues and not just dismiss them, so that it can be a more inclusive movement. But that's a time issue, and not everybody wants to take the time. But it does take time. Anybody who thinks they're pretty evolved now has to recognize it took them a while to get there. So we have to keep the conditions possible for people to keep listening, keep talking, keep reading, and potentially change their minds and evolve.
Reporting for WRHU, I'm Courtney Ingalls.
That'll do it for tonight's show. Tonight's producer is Cassidy Slammin, and our engineer is Anne-Marie Lepard. Thank you for tuning in, and keep listening to WRHU this month for our ongoing celebration of Women's History Month. For WRHU, I'm Julia Wachtel. Stay tuned for Newsline only here on your 3-time Marconi Award-winning radio station, 88.7 FM WRHU.